I hope that you can come here. A lot of seats available. Good evening. It is my pleasure to welcome you to Northern Essex Community College. My name is Noemi Custodia-Lora. I'm the Vice President of Lawrence Campus and Community Relations. Today, NECC is teaming up with the Black Economic Council of Massachusetts, BECMA, and in partnership with E4O, the Lawrence Partnership, and the Davis System, we present an Attorney General discussion here in Lawrence. When I have to admit, when Darian Johnson, the policy advocacy lead BECMA, contacted me to ask me if I would be interested in hosting this event, I immediately responded yes. And the reason for that is because to me, this is an act of social justice. This is an opportunity for us to be civically responsible, because now the residents of Lawrence will have the opportunity to hear about each candidate and their positions on issues that are important to us here in the community, like education, housing, safety in the street, and voting rights. So today we're going to start by first I'm going to introduce you, Nicole, who is the President and CEO of BECMA. Can you come to the stage, please?
Good evening, everyone. Good evening. Thank you. So good to see you all here tonight. I am Nicole Obi, President and CEO of the Black Economic Council of Massachusetts, and I'm so excited to add our welcome to everyone attending in person and those attending remotely. I'm also honored that we're able to host this important Attorney General's Forum here in Lawrence, a city filled with history, diversity, culture, and resiliency. How about a hand for Lawrence? BECMA's role in this event follows directly from our mission, which is to advance the economic well-being of Black business owners, residents, organizations across the Commonwealth through advocacy, business and leadership development, as well as strategic partnerships like what we've had here tonight. We do so through uplifting our 4 pillars for helping to close the Massachusetts racial wealth gap. Those pillars are entrepreneurship, commerce, placement, and ownership. Our members at BECMA include Black students, professionals, as well as Black business owners and ally organizations who are committed to helping to close the Massachusetts racial wealth gap. We're here tonight to host one-on-one discussions with the candidates for the Massachusetts Attorney General's office. And this office is very important as it acts as the people's lawyer by combating fraud as well as corruption, by investigating and prosecuting crimes, and by protecting civil, consumer, and workers' rights, and much more. I'd like to acknowledge other players that really helped to make this event happen tonight. First, Northern Essex Community College for allowing us to use this great space, as well as our event partners, E4All, the Lawrence Partnership, and the Davis System. Also, our great moderator, Noemi. We're really looking forward to getting in touch with the candidates tonight and learning more. I'd also like to thank the 3 candidates for sharing their plans to address the racial and economic issues that face communities of color and others across the Commonwealth here. It's not often when our voices are able to be heard in statewide races, and so we're really thrilled that they're here tonight. I'd also like to thank all of our elected officials for being here tonight. And lastly, I'd like to thank the community of Lawrence and the Merrimack Valley for welcoming us into your home. Now, I'd like to introduce Senator Barry Feingold. Senator Feingold, Senator Feingold has served for over 2 decades in the state legislature, first representing the city of Lawrence in the 17th Essex House District before moving to the Senate. He's currently the state senator for the 2nd Essex and Middlesex District. He chairs the legislators, you have to tell me if I get any of this wrong. He chairs the legislators' Joint Committee on Election Laws and the Joint Committee on Advanced Information Technology, the Internet, and Cybersecurity. Thank you so much, Senator, for joining us tonight.
Good evening. Good evening. All right. So I do want to thank the Black Economic Council of Massachusetts for inviting me here tonight, and for all of you for coming out here. So my name is State Senator Barry Feingold. Some of you know me as Senator Orofino, but it's been an amazing privilege to represent the city of Lawrence. And tonight we will hear from 3 great candidates, Andrea Campbell, Shannon Liss Reardon, and Quentin Pelfry. I'm really excited for them to come to Lawrence. We've interacted a lot with the Attorney General's office, and it's really important that not only do they come here tonight, but they keep coming back to our great city. I know many of you have heard this before, but I think it's really important to keep reiterating that over a decade ago, Boston Magazine called us the city of the damned. And the piece that they wrote overlooked so many of the great things that were happening in the city. But with all and so many of the great people in this room, we've proven the naysayers wrong. You know, businesses used to struggle just to get loans in our city, but now we've successfully encouraged Eastern Bank to come here, Rating Cooperative to come here, and now one of the most famous banks in the whole wide world, Chase Bank, is coming to the city of Lawrence. In education, 10 years ago, high school graduation rates were around 50%. Now they're 70% plus. And we are building a new Oliver School building project, so this is clearly a city on the move. We are the only city in the Commonwealth that has majority-minority police force. And 20 years ago, we had over 2,000 stolen cars in the city a year. Now we have less than 200 because of having a great police department here in the city of Lawrence. And I want to thank Chief Vass and the rest of our police for all the work they've done. And it's been a great public-private partnership. But I really want to echo, why is it so important? Why is it so important tonight that the Attorney General candidates are coming here? Well, when we had the Columbia gas disaster, it was the Attorney General that helped lead the way in having a $56 million payout for the citizens of Andover, North Andover, Lawrence. When there was continued to be this huge problem with opioids, so much of that money has come to Lawrence in relief after our Attorney General, Maura Healey, had a huge settlement with some of the pharma companies. And I can go on and on and on about why the Attorney General is so important. So I just want to say I appreciate everyone coming out tonight. Please let them know how important that we want people to continue to come to our great city. And please let them know that this city is amazing, that it's a city on the move, and there's only continue to be great things. So thank you so much for having me, and I wish you all the best, and thank you for being involved. Thank you again.
And now we're going to be having each individual candidate and a partner will come to the podium. They're going to have a series of questions, and then at the end, there's going to be an opportunity for you guys to also ask questions. So the first partner that we have here is Anthony Davis. And the candidate is Andrea Campbell. Where is she's coming? Okay. We have them in the back studying their lines. Oh, she's coming this way.
Here we are.
your fault. They have you in the
Thank you. So before starting the conversation, if you guys can speak briefly, like 2 or 3 sentences about who you are and what you represent, and then you can start with the questions.
Absolutely. I'm going to go ahead and start.
To introduce myself? Oh, yes. Andrea Campbell, candidate for Attorney General, and happy to be here, honored to be here, and looking forward to the conversation. Thank you.
Awesome. My name is Anthony Davis Jr., CEO of the Davis System, LLC. We are a small boutique consulting firm based in Boston, Black-owned firm, and proud to be partnering on this event and to also be here on the stage with you. So we can jump right into our first question. Our first question is around lived experience. So how will your lived experience influence how you fulfill your responsibilities in the Office of the Attorney General?
I have actually been stressing there are 3 candidates obviously in the race, and there are distinctions that I make. One is obviously our legal experiences are different. Our legislative experience is different. I think I'm the only candidate actually with legislative experience, but then also our lived experience. And I've been stressing how much that matters even when folks discount it. And why is that? I jumped into the race recognizing that families are struggling. I started my day in Lawrence, actually. This is the 3rd time I've been in Lawrence as a candidate in this race, talking to families who are worried about the rising price of goods, who are worried about racial disparities, worried about violence, prison reform, immigration, the school to prison pipeline, et cetera. I've experienced those issues personally. When I was 8 months old, my mom died in a car accident going to visit my father, who was incarcerated at the time. My father and my brothers cycled in and out of the prison system, and my twin brother Andre died 10 years ago while in the custody of the Department of Correction as a pretrial detainee when he was only 29 years old as a result of receiving inadequate health care. All of my biological parents are deceased. All of my biological grandparents are deceased. I'm the first in my family to go to college, the first in my family to go to law school, and I've dedicated my entire life to giving back to residents in this state and to my community. That matters. I know it connects with folks who want to see someone in office that can relate to their struggle, especially our young people in this moment in time.
Thank you for that answer. So our next question is around community gentrification. Many people here in Massachusetts, including those in the city of Lawrence, are getting priced out of their own neighborhoods. As Attorney General, what forms of support and protections to tenants and homeowners would you advocate for?
A lot. So I've actually been talking about, obviously housing is coming up as one of the top issues in the entire state. And I've been stressing we need to look at the Attorney General office and officer, not just as the top cop. A recent state trooper said, "You're the top cop. You're going to be the next top cop of Massachusetts." I'm like, we have to rebrand it. Yes, you are the chief law enforcement office and officer, and you have to implement our laws with a sense of urgency, a sense of immediacy. But the office has the tools and resources to help people stay in their homes. There is tremendous fear right now about a potential foreclosure crisis coming out after COVID. The office has experience in the past, especially in 2008, 2009 recession, helping people stay in their homes, working with mortgage companies. I think the next wave of work within the Consumer Protection Bureau of the office is really protecting tenants. The office has not really done, I think, a really proactive job of going after landlords that are using all types of practices to push our families out, to push our tenants out. It's not only happening in Lawrence, I know, through various examples, but I was just in Beverly, where a whole group of seniors were evicted from their home because of landlord practices. I was just on the phone with the mayor of Medford, who was talking about a landlord who kicked out all the tenants, said he was going to refurbish the apartments. He did not refurbish those apartments. He moved new tenants in, and now those other tenants are out on the street. And so these are consumer protection cases where an AG can step up to not only hold those landlords accountable, but also make sure these residents are housed. In addition to that, my first piece of legislation on the city council was the Community Preservation Act. That's generating millions of dollars in Boston right now to create more affordable housing and homeownership opportunities. This is something I think an AG can also do, pushing for more resources and more legislative solutions
at the State House. So I know the senator was here earlier, honored to have his support, the current mayor of this city, the former mayor, working really hard because the legislative solutions are also going to be critical. And then I'll just add discrimination. A lot of discrimination for Section 8 voucher holders, a lot of discrimination against immigrants, including those who are undocumented, a lot of discrimination against families, lead paint discrimination as well. So really enforcing our fair housing laws and addressing discrimination, critically important as well in the housing context. That could be a whole conversation.
You segued into our next question actually pretty well. So this next question is actually focused around immigration and immigrant communities here in Massachusetts. So what is currently not working with the Commonwealth criminal justice system in regards to its immigrant communities? What would you do to fix it?
One, I would prioritize the issues. I care deeply about criminal legal reform, prison reform, the cradle to prison pipeline, the cradle to deportation pipeline. I started my career as a lawyer representing children in education cases for free. A lot of my families fell below the poverty line. So I represented a lot of students on disabilities, a lot of students with IEPs, a lot of English learners, a lot of new arrivals, a lot of families within communities of color, immigrant communities, and poor communities, pushing for school systems to deliver a high quality education to our kids and holding all school systems accountable, whether it's traditional public schools, charter schools, MECO programs, parochial schools, you name it. So that leadership I would bring into the office. I don't think, as someone said, I don't know that any previous attorney general has an education law background, which connects to the criminal legal system. They're not detached. Most of the school-based offenses that you see lead to incarceration. And many of the school discipline practices, you see higher rates of school discipline amongst immigrant students, new arrivals, and students of color, a pathway to deportation or a pathway to criminalization. So one, prioritize the issues, tackle this cradle to prison pipeline, do more to invest in reentry programming. I was just talking to one of the main staff members for the current mayor of Lawrence about the youth involvement in gangs here in Lawrence. Absolute work to do to break those cycles of poverty and incarceration, and something that is near and dear. I still have loved ones who are incarcerated as we sit on this stage. There's a population of folks that are often forgotten, not under my leadership.
That's awesome. All right. So next question is just about the city of Lawrence in general. So how would your approach as Attorney General benefit a city like Lawrence?
One, I would show up. We kicked off what we call this Gateway Cities Tour to go into communities that feel left out and left behind, particularly communities outside of 495. This is not the first time I've been in Lawrence. I've been in Lawrence several times, meeting with the current mayor, meeting with previous mayor, meeting with some business owners. Today I was doing a business walk, meeting with community-based organizations, activists that are doing the work on the ground. And so one, it's critical to show up. I think we can actually establish a greater presence here if it's not a regional office, funding positions here in the city that work in partnership with the AG's office, but also organizations here to provide constituent services, address cases related to scams, related to housing, immigration. I was just with Evelyn Freeman at GLAC and talking with her about a position that used to exist within that organization. They serve nearly 35,000 residents, providing all types of services. I think we need to restore that position and make it full-time and hire folks from the community. It was a part-time position. So establish a presence here in Lawrence so people don't have to go to Boston for services, critically important. And when you establish that presence, what's it for? Addressing poverty. One thing I learned today that will shock everyone, it's still sitting with me, that of all the children born in Lawrence, 93% of those children are WIC participants. So the level of poverty in Lawrence is astounding. And I had to say to Evelyn, I said, is that true? She says, yeah, the data is in the folder I just gave you. So there's a lot more to do here, not only to address housing, immigration, but to help folks build wealth. And I think that means taking on price gouging and the uptick in prices. We talked a lot about the baby formula shortage that affected a lot of those WIC participants. AG can take on those. In addition to that, helping folks build wealth, help them buy homes. When I was on the city council, I established a program where we went into public housing. There's a program now helping folks move out of public housing into homeownership opportunities. We can have similar programs here in Lawrence. And why do you focus on a home? If residents have a home, they can take the capital out of that to start a business. And the last I checked, in immigrant communities, they have several businesses. They are entrepreneurs by spirit, by culture. And I was walking and introducing myself to some of those businesses today. So I think there's a lot an AG can do, bringing resources and all types of creative thinking to help folks move out of poverty, build their wealth, working with organizations on the ground, and working with universities on workforce development opportunities, internships, and all types of pipeline opportunities in the new industries that will come, including in the context of, say, climate and the green economy. Sorry, I could go on and on. I know we don't have a lot of time.
Thank you for.
We have my, sorry.
Okay.
No, I was just going to say thank you for those answers. I know Noemi has a few additional questions as well.
We want to open it first to the public to see if people have questions.
Oh, there's one over here.
Oh, great.
I know.
I'm coming. I'm coming.
You do not get a microphone.
How can you help the homeless in Lawrence in particular? Because I know there's many programs for homeless veterans, children who, for whatever reason, foster not in their own home, who are homeless, who were 18 and in school.
So repeating back the question, how can you help those who are homeless, but particularly children, school-age children? So in the same meeting this morning, and I have to tell you, Evelyn Friedman and her team are doing incredible work to address all of these issues. We also talked about the homeless population, and there's an initiative right now that they have started looking at specifically elementary students. They think there may be 200 families, but they think that number is actually underreported because sometimes folks don't report that they're homeless for different reasons. And so they're starting an initiative right now to find ways to house these families. I think one, it requires obviously making it easier for them to do that. So that's production, generating more housing is critically important, generating more affordable housing or housing at affordable price points, critically important. I think an AG can be partnering with local municipalities and others in some of these conversations, particularly on the affordability piece. I think working with the next governor is going to have to be critical too. An AG can't do it by themselves, but working with the next governor is going to be critical. And why is that? There are all these resources that exist in the state right now, all of the federal dollars that we have that we could be directing to certain types of initiatives to help these families. And I mentioned a program just a few minutes ago that started actually in Lynn, but I pushed for it to be brought into Boston, where you go into public housing to help folks through these self-sufficiency, some of these federal programs, to move them out of public housing into homeownership opportunities. What does that do? It then frees up the public housing availability for families that desperately need it. And so it's an ongoing issue, but I think if we prioritize it, work with the next governor, there's a lot we can do to address it. Thank you.
Question here.
You guys are making me run. I like this.
Your steps. Here you go.
How would you balance between calls to defund the police by communities that have rightfully felt that they are overly policed and unfairly policed on one hand, and the very real public safety concerns that many families have in those communities and the desire to have better relations with the police or better policing?
Thank you for the question, because I will tell you, before I got off this stage, I would have talked about the fact that just yesterday, a 15-year-old was shot and killed in my neighborhood in Boston, the former council district that I represented. And there's going to be a community meeting tomorrow where residents are going to mobilize and say enough is enough. It's a pressing issue right now where when a 15-year-old gets shot, they don't call me at 2 a.m. They don't call me at midnight. They call the police. They call public safety agents who have to show up. And I respect that and know how important that is. At the same time, many of these communities are over-policed and underprotected. I've heard that quite a bit. So how do you push for resources into public safety agencies so they can do their job effectively? I recognize that regional equity is a major issue. So Boston, for example, I think has a lot of resources. You go outside of Boston to other public safety agencies. That's not the case. I actually worked with our governor, who's obviously a Republican. I'm a Democrat, but worked across the aisle to actually get funding for our police department in Boston to improve our community policing efforts. So I've done that work of making sure we are fully resourced. At the same time, transparency and accountability and the lack of diversity, major issues. And I've also done that work. So you can have both. When I was on the council, we drafted legislation. We now have this Office of Police Accountability and Transparency in the city of Boston. It is historic with a civilian review board. So if there are certain types of cases or complaints, you now have a place to go to get some kind of justice. Other municipalities want that. The community wanted body cameras. When I started on the city council, I said, okay, city, well, where's the program? We have that now implemented in the city of Boston. And body cameras are a great accountability tool, not just for civilians, but also for officers too. So you can have both. I think where AG needs to show up, it's a statewide conversation. Make it that. Each municipality shouldn't be doing it on their own. When I was talking to the mayor of Fall River, for example, he said, I would like body cameras. I would like certain tools here. Other officers would want these types of things in place as well. Bring everyone to the table, including the unions, to get things done. And it's critically important. And then the last piece I have to stress, the AG's office can do a lot more to invest in community-based organizations, individuals, to disrupt these cycles of violence. So we don't have a 15-year-old getting shot and killed while just enjoying the summer.
Thank you so much. Before I get to you, there's actually questions we're getting from online as well. So we are going to integrate that. Oh yeah, we're on multiple.
Where's the online? Oh, is this it? Hi. Hello.
Perfect. So I want to get it from Stacey Reed, and it's very similar to criminal justice, which is why I wanted to bring it up right now. She said in 2020, a report from the Criminal Justice Policy Program at Harvard Law School published stated that Black and Latinx people are overrepresented in Massachusetts' criminal justice system, and that they receive longer sentences than their white counterparts when convicted. As Attorney General, what do you plan to do to address these disparities?
Those disparities are real in Massachusetts and elsewhere. We often, I think, we say we are progressive and we rest on our laurels, but if you look at our criminal legal system, our prison system, we're far from it. And it's not just who is incarcerated, it's also how we treat them. The conditions of confinement in prisons, and I've been to a lot of prisons as a visitor, they are horrific. There was a report that recently came out about how women are treated in prison, rape, sexual assault, all types of things, the violence that you see. So for me, it's one, working on sentencing guidelines. Yes, you can do that. I think there's still work to do in Massachusetts and at the federal level. I think the reentry programming is critical. Certain sheriffs and certain houses of correction doing that really well. The Department of Correction, which oversees our prisons, where my twin brother was in custody, it's still an agency that's like a black hole. Good luck trying to get some transparency and accountability from this agency. An attorney general is the state's attorney. You represent that agency. So you have significant power to say, we don't like how you're treating prisoners. We don't like these reports that are coming to us that are speaking of people dying. In the context of my own family, my family still doesn't know what happened to my twin brother. 10 years out, we still haven't had any accountability or justice, and I know that's true for so many families. So an AG has the power to say, we're not going to represent you in certain cases, and that we are going to push you to do and be better. And on the reentry piece, we talk a lot about it, but we really don't fund it. And we need to start behind the wall to give folks the housing, the documentation, the job skills, whatever it is they need to be successful. And at the same time, that benefits the correctional officers and the COs who work in these establishments, and to shift the culture of violence that we see and to view those folks as human beings. And I will just end with this. Often the candidates are asked, what are the top 3 things you will address? I never list racial disparities as one of my top 3. That's the norm. Everything an AG does, or any government official, should be through a racial equity lens, where you're always asking yourself, what are we doing to close the gaps and racial disparities that exist in every system, criminal, housing, healthcare, economic, you name it. And the AG can do a lot because you have the law on your side, you have the credibility, you have the resources, and you have the talent and the staff. So thank you to that online participant.
Thank you. I didn't forget about you.
me see. I wrote my question. So, as the people's lawyer, how will you challenge laws such as Chapter 69, 1K, 1J, which is the receivership law, which has resulted in taking away the right of the people of color to vote for their own representation by undermining the democracy process and the power granted by the Constitution to constituents to elect their own people in office?
So with that specifically the receivership statute in the context of schools, in this, and correct me if I'm wrong, in this idea that there is no local participation vote in determining whether or not a school district will be sort of overtaken by the state under a receivership? Yep.
So would you challenge the law in particular that takes away, right, the right for a minority community to have representation in an elected body?
So you mentioned receivership. That's always so confusing. So it's receivership, and then there's like the school committee piece. Is that what you're referencing? And I love how you're like Chapter 69, wait, 1K, 1J. Yep. Thank you. So the actual provision has never come up, and everyone else is like, what's that? But the question has. That's why I wanted to elaborate. The question has, and this idea that folks can lose, or a municipality, a city or a town, can lose control of, in this context, a school system or something else, and not be allowed to vote or participate in that decision making. I think that's wrong. I think you should absolutely have a voice, especially communities of color, and we know this usually happens in districts, or I should say municipalities, cities, or towns where it's predominantly a community of color, or like in Lawrence. The only thing I will add, sometimes we ask for only elected bodies to be the voice of that community. Sometimes I question that, because in certain communities, say the school committee that is elected is not always reflective of the community they serve, right? The elected offices are not always reflective of the community they serve. So what I also believe in is doing true community engagement, grassroots engagement, to make sure the folks who are affected by these decisions that we make are also a part of the process. So sometimes that requires changing laws or provisions like you just described to require it and mandate it. Sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes it's policy and practice, and really doing the work of engaging communities to be at the table when you're talking about them, so they're informing the policies that we dish out that affect them. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Those were the last of the questions that we had for the time that was allotted for you. So thank you so much for taking the time to answer the questions. I would love if the crowd could give her a round of applause.
Thank you.
Quick closing.
And I was just about to say, you can provide your closing remarks.
Thank you all for having me. And I know the senator was here, and obviously the current mayor of the city. I'm honored to have their support, and many other elected officials, but I'm not taking anything or anyone for granted. I'm really honored to be here. BECMA, thank you for hosting this and putting this on. Thank you to the college. And I've been stressing to folks, if you care about what's happening in your community with respect to violence, racial disparities, education, immigration, housing, the Supreme Court, reproductive health, you want to care about the Attorney General race. And I want to earn your vote. I want to work for it, because not only will I show up, my lived experience I know matters and relates to the struggle that many families are facing. I think my legal background is quite unique. Not only education law, worked for Governor Deval Patrick as an attorney, and I'm the only candidate that has a legislative record of going into that state house to deliver and get things done, which based on what's happening at the Supreme Court is going to be critical for the next AG. So I hope to earn your support in this race. Thank you all for coming out. Thank you for hosting me. Thank you for the questions. And don't forget to vote the day after Labor Day. Plan your party, plan your vote. Thank you. And thank you so much for having me. Thank you.
Thank you for your patience. We're going to transition to the next candidate, so just give us a few minutes. Thank you.
Next, we have the next person that is running, which is Quentin Pelfry. And he will be asked questions by George Ramirez from the Lawrence Partnership.
Hey, how are you? Thanks so much for having me.
Sure.
Is that... Hey, everybody. Thanks so much for having me.
Welcome. Do you want to say a few words about your background?
Sure. So my name is Quentin Pelfry. I'm a proud Democrat running for Attorney General. This is an extraordinary moment in American history. We've got a Supreme Court attacking our civil rights. Our democracy is literally under attack. We've got a Congress that's failing to lead on the really big challenges we face: the climate crisis, gun violence, racial injustice. And as a former Assistant Attorney General, I've seen firsthand how much impact the people's lawyer can have on Lawrence and communities all across Massachusetts. And with our fundamental rights under attack, we need Massachusetts to lead on the really big challenges we face: racial injustice, the climate crisis, attacks on our democracy, attacks on workers' rights, reproductive rights, gun violence, housing costs, student loans. We've got so much work to do, and so much of that affects communities like Lawrence. I was the first chief of the healthcare division in the Attorney General's office at the time that we were implementing Massachusetts health reform. We worked hard to make sure that everyone had access to high quality, affordable health care. I sued some big insurance companies and kicked them out of Massachusetts. I had the great honor to serve under President Barack Obama in the White House as senior advisor for jobs and competitiveness, and came back into the Biden administration on day one to try to help build an economy that works for everyone. And I'm really excited to be back here in the city of Lawrence in a community conversation with you about how we can use the office of the people's lawyer to take on the really big challenges that we face. So thank you so much for coming out here tonight. I'm really looking forward to this conversation.
Thank you, Quentin. That's a pretty impressive background. Quick note, my name is George Ramirez, and I'm the Executive Director of the Lawrence Partnership, a nonprofit committed to improving the quality of life here in Lawrence through inclusive economic development. And I want to note that Jess Andors, one of my bosses, is here, so say hello to Jess. Okay, well, let's get started. Quentin, thank you again. We're delighted to have you. The first question is, how will your political stances and philosophy shape how you lead the office of the Attorney General?
Thanks so much for that question. I think that the people's lawyer is the voice for consumers, the voice for workers, but also the chief civil rights officer in the Commonwealth. And let me take a good example of this. Where you live and the color of your skin shouldn't determine what kind of education your children receive. We are 68 years after Brown versus Board of Education. Our schools are still segregated. There's still massive differences in terms of the educational opportunities we give depending on where in Massachusetts you grow up. And as the chief civil rights officer in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, the AG should treat educational inequity with the urgency that it deserves. And I strongly disagree with those, including my opponent, Andrea Campbell, who feel like the solution to that challenge is to expand charter schools. That hasn't worked. The voters rejected it in 2016, siphons off resources and picks winners and losers. The real solution is to invest in communities like Lawrence, believe in democracy, reject the false solution of receivership and displacing local leaders, and really invest in our communities, take on structural racism and create opportunity for everyone. And as the chief civil rights officer in Massachusetts, I think it's incumbent upon us to say when the state is failing to provide a free and appropriate public education for every child, and then to fix it.
Thank you very much. The next question is around housing stability. I have to take these glasses off because they're to see far, not close. So during the peak of the COVID-19 crisis, Massachusetts established a moratorium on non-essential evictions and residential foreclosures. However, evictions and foreclosures remain an issue for many minority communities. What steps would you take as AG to promote housing stability for everyone in Massachusetts?
The Attorney General is the people's lawyer. Rent is too high. Mortgages are unaffordable for too many people. This is part of a massive problem in this country, which is in the last couple of decades, the rich have gotten richer, big corporations have gotten more and more of the economic pie, and everybody else falls behind. And the AG has a proud tradition of standing up for borrowers against big banks, for standing up for tenants against landlords who mistreat them. And let me point out a couple of the big differences in this race. I support rent control as one of the solutions to housing unaffordability. My friend and opponent, Andrea Campbell, has opposed that solution. I reject super PAC contributions to my campaign and have called on my opponents to sign the People's Pledge to keep outside money out of our campaigns. In her last campaign for mayor of Boston, she accepted super PAC support, including from large developers. So if you want an attorney general who's going to stand up against the special interests, fight for housing justice, and really take on these big banks and these big landlords, you have to have an attorney general who is independent of those special interests. And that's going to be the way that I'm going to approach the office.
Thank you for that, Quentin. The next question is around voting. Where do you think Massachusetts stands among other states in providing access to the ballot to disenfranchised communities, minorities, prisoners, etc.?
So it's not good enough. It's not good enough. Our democracy is literally under attack. An armed mob stormed to the Capitol to try and disrupt the peaceful transition of power. We have seen history unfolding before our eyes, but this has been happening for decades. I led a team of 4,000 lawyers for President Obama in Ohio. I saw firsthand 4 5-hour lines in African-American communities where there have been systematic efforts to disenfranchise voters on the basis of race and age and immigration status for years. I founded a national voter protection organization called the Voter Protection Corps. And I think Massachusetts is not doing good enough on this issue. And let me say, this is in the context of a national climate where our democracy has been deeply eroded. So Joe Biden went to John Lewis's hometown on Martin Luther King Day and said, we've got to do something about voting rights in this country. He was rebuffed by Mitch McConnell, every member of the Republican caucus, Joe Manchin and Kyrsten Sinema. So if you ask yourself, where are the solutions going to come from for rebuilding and protecting our democracy? It's going to come from the states. Massachusetts has a wonderful tradition of leadership in so many other areas. The national constitution was based on the Massachusetts Constitution. We led the way on equal marriage, on universal access to care. We were at the center of the abolitionist movement against slavery. And yet, right here in Massachusetts, we have too many barriers to people registering, voting, and having their votes count. Last week in the legislature, special interests blocked the passage of a bill that was going to include same-day voter registration. So this is something that's worked in 20 states in the District of Columbia. Those arbitrary registration deadlines block young people, people of color, people who move around a lot from registering and voting. Otherwise eligible voters who could vote in New Hampshire cannot vote here in Massachusetts. Why can't they vote? Because our legislature is broken. because people on Beacon Hill are afraid that students are going to vote against them and don't want same-day registration because it's hurt their electoral prospects. Why can't you get access to the governor's office records? Why can't you get access to the legislature's records? In other states you can. Why can't you know how your legislator voted on a bill? So last week, there was a bill to give relief to people who are affected by inflation. Do you know who they excluded? People who make under $38,000 a year, the very people who need it the most. A lot of people in this room or in this city could have used that benefit. That's a travesty. But you know what's even worse? You have no idea how your representatives on Beacon Hill voted on that exclusion of the people under $38,000 a year. Do you know why you don't know that? Because they don't want you to know that, because they don't want you to be able to call them up and say, why did you exclude people under $38,000 a year? We have so much money coming into the coffers of Beacon Hill right now. They ought to be spending it on places like Lawrence, investing in giving economic relief to communities that need it. But because our democracy doesn't work, because Beacon Hill doesn't work, because there's not enough transparency, you don't get the relief and the support that you need. So you need people who are not part of that Beacon Hill culture, who haven't been endorsed by the Speaker of the House and half the legislature, to go there and say that's not okay.
Quentin, thank you. And if I may, just out of point of curiosity, was that particular vote, was that a voice vote? Because usually they register when they vote. And
Absolutely. That is the problem. That is the problem. Those voice votes do not register who is voting for or against an amendment. So there was an amendment on the floor to say, let's put back in people who make under $38,000 a year, the very people who are hurt most by the economy not working for everyone. Why did Beacon Hill exclude those people?
Thank you very much for clarifying that. Lastly, how would you approach as Attorney General, how would your approach as Attorney General benefit a city like Lawrence, Lowell, some of the gateway cities?
Yeah, absolutely. Look, I want to talk for a moment about the issue of racial inequality in our criminal legal system. The murder of George Floyd and the Kyle Rittenhouse verdict are just the most recent reminders that there are two justice systems in America. We imprison too many people for too long for doing too little. Race has too much to do with who ends up in the criminal justice system. And so we need an attorney general who is going to take on criminal justice reform, corrections oversight, police accountability, finally getting a handle on the corruption and mismanagement in the state police. And until we can deal with the structural racism in our criminal legal system, until we can take on the racial disparities in our education system, in our healthcare system, in our economy, in transportation, we are not going to have the kind of justice that we deserve. And we're in a moment where those civil rights, where those economic rights are not going to be protected by a federal judiciary that's been hijacked by extremists, right? We know that the Supreme Court is now a radical anti-civil rights body. We know that our Congress is going to fail to take on the really big challenges of our time. So we need an attorney general who has been in that office. I was the chief of the healthcare division. I know how to use the attorney general's office to be the people's lawyer. But I will tell you, I am proud to have the support, the endorsement of the Democratic Party of Massachusetts at the convention, of all of the biggest progressive groups, Progressive Mass, Progressive Dems of Mass, Our Revolution, the Sierra Club 350 Mass. And that is because of my values. There are real differences in this race. On single-payer healthcare, which I support and Andrea Campbell opposes. On safe injection sites that I support and Andrea Campbell opposes. On the cap on charter schools. We shouldn't expand charter schools or put schools into receivership. There are really big policy differences in this race. So if you want an attorney general who's going to stand up against special interests, who's going to take on the really big challenges, fight for healthcare as a human right, an economy that works for everyone, urgent action on racial injustice and criminal justice reform. That's what the Attorney General does. That's the kind of Attorney General I'm going to be. I'm going to work in partnership with communities like Lawrence to take on these really big challenges.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Those are my set of questions, and I don't know if the moderator or the audience would have questions.
Here. I mean, you said so many things, so I'm going to be angry at the crowd if we can't come up with at least a couple of questions for one of our candidates. Same question. Let's start off the top.
So as the people's lawyer, how will you challenge the laws such as Chapter 69, 1K, 1J, which is the receivership law? How will you challenge it?
Yeah, so receivership has not worked in Lawrence. It hasn't worked in Southbridge. You see they're trying to do it in Boston. It's not going to work there. And one of the things that is so broken about receivership is that it undermines elected leaders. It undermines democracy. We're talking about ways that democracy works. Your elected leaders should have the resources and the support from the state to make sure that every child in Lawrence gets the opportunities in life that they need. So we need to take the platform of the Attorney General's office to fight back against DC, against receivership, against expanding charter schools, against privatizing our education, and invest in our communities, invest in our public schools, believe in our elected school committee members, and make sure that every child in Massachusetts, every child in the Merrimack Valley gets the opportunities in life that they deserve. We need to work in partnership to solve those problems. And it is not just about investing in the four corners of the K through 12 system. We got to invest in early childhood education. We got to disrupt the cycles of poverty and incarceration. We got to take on these really big challenges, but we got to do it together. And the first step is acknowledging those structural disparities. And then the second step is taking on unfair and unjust laws like the receivership law and the way that it's been applied right here in Lawrence.
Thank you so much. I have another question from one of our online viewers. Yeah, I'm keeping you guessing about where I'm located. It is from Christopher Goffigan, the founder of Black People United, LLC. His question is, how will you address the many workplace complaints and harassment that exists? And there's a particular focus that Christopher would like you to focus on, which includes discrimination, retaliation, and other things that happen in workplaces. What would you do to address those issues?
Thank you so much for that question, Christopher. So as I mentioned before, the Attorney General is the Chief Civil Rights Officer in the Commonwealth. I worked in the Attorney General's office alongside the lawyers who used the civil rights laws to stand up for workers when they're being discriminated against in the workplace. We also have the opportunity to use the labor laws to stand up for workers who are being mistreated. So one issue, in addition to discrimination in the workplace, is wage theft, which tends to affect the most vulnerable people in our economy. This is $1 billion a year problem. It disproportionately affects people in the immigrant community who are misclassified, who are denied the right to organize, who are denied their benefits. And so we need to use the civil rights laws to fight back against discrimination in our workplaces. And we need to use the labor laws to make sure that workers get a fair share in this economy and in the workplace.
Oh, one more question.
I'm interested in what you think about the fact that it's one thing to change policy, right, at your level and say, let's say mandate, racial awareness training in police departments across the state. And it's another thing to change culture in individual police departments and towns. So how would you address that deeper challenge around culture?
Yeah, absolutely. Look, this is a society-wide challenge. We need to first recognize the challenges. We need to recognize the way that there are racial disparities in policing. We need to have a conversation about that, but then there needs to be accountability. One of the things that we've seen is that Beacon Hill, and in particular the AG office, I think can do a better job of taking on corruption and mismanagement and racial discrimination in the police force. The state police in particular is sorely in need of more oversight. Local police forces need more oversight, and we need to hold people accountable for the discrimination and the bad conduct that occurs. We need to do a better job of training. We do need to do a better job of recruiting diverse workforces in those communities. And we need to model effective diversity, equity, and inclusion programs in statewide agencies. So one of the things that I would like to do in the Attorney General's office is make sure that we have better community outreach to communities of color, to non-English speaking communities, to communities all across the state. So often Beacon Hill forgets that the rest of the state is out here. I grew up in Central Mass, and the state ends at Newton. In terms of Beacon Hill. So we need to do a better job of outreach. We need to make sure that the office represents the diversity of the state at every level, at the senior leadership level, but also in the ranks of the attorney workforce and the non-attorney workforce. We need to do a lot better job of modeling that kind of behavior within our office as well.
Quentin, we have one last question, and I'm going to be asking the question. This one is related to gun control. So how would your actions in the AG office impact existing restrictions to guns in Massachusetts in line with what has happened at the Supreme Court?
It's just devastating to see these mass shootings. I have three kids, 13, 11, and 5, and you see something like what happened at Uvalde. And also just remember how many other times this has happened, Sandy Hook. And you ask yourself, when is somebody going to do something about this? When is Congress going to ban assault weapons? When are we going to do the very obvious things? But the problem is that Congress is owned by the NRA. They're just dysfunctional. They're not going to solve those problems. Massachusetts has some of the best gun laws in the country. We've had some of the best leadership, and we've had some of the best results. And now this radical Supreme Court is undermining our ability even to solve these problems. So Massachusetts needs to lead. We need the strongest gun laws in the country. We're going to need to work with the legislature to make sure that they stand up against these attacks from this radical Supreme Court. But we need to lead the way as well. We shouldn't make assault weapons in Massachusetts that aren't allowed to be sold here. That's not banned. We need to hold gun manufacturers accountable for the consequences of their actions. We need to prevent weapons of war from coming in from out of state. We need to prevent 3D printed guns and ghost guns from finding their way into our communities. We need to prevent bulk purchases and armories. We need to get serious about community violence prevention because we know that most gun violence happens at the community level. So we need to use evidence-based policies within our community to prevent gun violence before it begins. And we need to get serious about suicide prevention. Because that is one of the places where gun violence is most devastating. We now have this red flag law, an extreme risk protection order that allows you to identify people that are at a risk to themselves and to others and help keep our families and communities safe. But Massachusetts has always led the way. We are going to need to lead the way right here on this gun violence epidemic.
Thank you so much. Folks online are actually very excited to hear from you. So I just wanted to ask you one more question and then we will wrap it up. It is from Ketlin Celestin. They asked, what is being done for crime victims beyond restorative justice measures to ensure that we avoid retaliation and intimidation, but still ensure accountability?
So we need to rethink the entire criminal justice system. Take the war on drugs. The war on drugs has been a devastating failure. It's led to over-incarceration. It's led to huge racial disparities in terms of who ends up in our criminal justice system. We are not going to arrest and incarcerate our way out of challenges that primarily relate to structural racism, to unstable housing, to mental health challenges and substance use disorder. We need to completely rethink the way that we deal with our carceral system. And I'm really a proud supporter of what you call the progressive prosecutor movement. I think that Rachel Rollins was a terrific Suffolk district attorney, is a great U.S. attorney. And one of the things that she did was use prosecutorial discretion to be innovative in trying to reduce the racial disparities and over-incarceration in our systems. We need that mindset to shift its way all the way across our criminal legal system. We need to disrupt the school to prison pipeline. We need to make sure that as people are growing up, that they have lots of opportunities to get their life on a good path. And then we also need to give people opportunities to re-enter society. So for instance, with cannabis laws that have changed, I think we ought to expunge all of those records, even people who are currently incarcerated, certainly people who are previously incarcerated, huge amounts of racial disparities in terms of who got dragged up in that horrible policy. We ought to expunge it. And we ought to give people an opportunity to not be burdened with those, the stigma of that previous punishment for those unjust laws.
Thank you so much. That was the last question that we had for you, but wanted to give you an opportunity to have closing remarks.
Thank you so much. Well, look, it's such a privilege to be here. Thank you for this wonderful conversation. I'd be really honored to be your Attorney General. As a former Assistant Attorney General, I've seen firsthand how much impact this office can have. I'm honored to have the support of the Democratic Party in this race. And I promise you that if I'm the Attorney General, I'm going to stand up against special interests. I'm going to fight for healthcare as a human right, for an economy that works for everyone, for good schools, for bold action on the climate crisis and racial injustice, because that's what the people's lawyer does. And that's the kind of Attorney General I'm going to be. We're running a strong grassroots campaign. I'm the only candidate in this race that's running a clean elections campaign. I'm entitled to public financing because I'm the only candidate that's agreed to the clean elections rules of this campaign. And we need your help. I need your help in Lawrence, in the Merrimack Valley, to get the word out about this grassroots campaign. So I would be honored to have your support, and I really appreciate the opportunity to talk to you here today. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. You want to go this way? All right, terrific. Thank you very much. Sorry, I have a little trouble turning.
Thank you for your patience. We're just going to have one moment and then have our last candidate.
Thank you so much.
Next, we're going to have the next candidate, which is Shannon Liz Royden. And the partner is going to be Sofan Smith from Afl-Cio. So before we start with the questions, I will ask that each of you will provide with some remarks about who you are and what you represent.
Guest of honor first?
Yes.
Yes, guest of honor first.
Yes.
Okay, hello. Good evening, everybody. It's really great to be here. My name is Shannon Liss Reardon. I am very proud and honored to be running to be your next Attorney General. I have been a workers' rights advocate and fighter for more than 20 years. For 23 years, I've been standing for working people, taking on some of the largest corporations in America. I've recovered more than $500 million in stolen wages for working people. I've been working as a private attorney general, and I'm looking forward to continuing and expanding on this important work with the power of the state behind me. I look forward to serving as your next attorney general. Thank you so much for having me tonight. I look forward to this conversation.
All right. Well, I'm not sure how to follow that one up, but good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Sofan Smith, and I work at E for All at Para Todos, Merrimack Valley. Essentially, we are an entrepreneurship organization, and we help entrepreneurs learn how to launch and start their business. We have programs in both English and Spanish, and they gave me this fancy title called Executive Director, and it looks great on my LinkedIn profile. So I'm honored to be here tonight, and I have several questions to ask you. So are you ready to get this party started?
Let's get going.
Now, audience, are we ready? Yeah. All right now. I know it's a little warm, but stay with me. Stay with me. We saved the best for last. All right, Shannon, the first question is around constituent outreach and really prioritizing the constituents. So if you are elected to the office of the Attorney General, what strategies will you use to ensure that the interests of your constituents remain at the forefront of your decision making?
So thank you for that question. I've been traveling all around Massachusetts for the last 6 months during this campaign, and a refrain that I've heard over and over again is that people want to make sure that the AG's office is accessible. If they've got a complaint, if they have an issue, they want to make sure there's someone they can call, there's someone they can talk to, and there'll be someone on the other end of that line who will be listening and who will be responsive to that complaint. So right now, the AG's office has outposts. It's not only in Boston, but it's in Worcester and Springfield and New Bedford. I would definitely keep those outposts and look into expanding to more places so that the office is accessible everywhere. I've been running law practice for more than 20 years, and as part of that practice, we get complaints in every day. We get thousands of complaints in the course of a month, and it's important that people get a response. If there are patterns of misconduct that are out there, we take it on and we figure out if there is some systemic action we can take. And as the Attorney General, we will have the power of hundreds of lawyers in the AG's office to take on fighting for workers who've had their wages stolen, fighting corporations who are scamming the elderly, helping tenants who are facing eviction. I've had thousands of clients who I have helped in my career as a lawyer, and I look forward to expanding my client base to the millions of residents of Massachusetts as Attorney General.
Thank you, Shannon. Accessibility is extremely important. My next question is around housing discrimination, and I know this affects a lot of people. Renters and homeowners alike face discrimination when they are renting or buying a home, getting a mortgage, seeking housing assistance, or engaging in other housing-related activities. So tell us, how will your office strengthen legal protections for such groups?
So in my career, my 23-year career representing workers, I have fought wage theft and I've also fought discrimination in the workplace. I will apply the same principles, the same experience, the same passion I have to fighting discrimination in the workplace to fighting discrimination in housing. That means taking on landlords, banks, owners of corporations that own manufactured housing communities, and make sure that our laws are enforced and that people are protected. Something that I know from my experience as a workers' rights lawyer is that even when we have strong laws on the books, like we do here in Massachusetts, those laws are only as good as they are enforced. Laws don't enforce themselves. I know how to enforce these laws. I know how to hold bad actors accountable. That's the approach I'll take as the Attorney General. And also, I plan to set up an office of the housing advocate in the AG's office. We're facing a housing crisis across the state. It's particularly severe here in the Merrimack Valley. People can't afford basic living expenses or a place to live. And our housing courts have been eviction mills. I want to make sure that tenants have access to representation and to assistance, and we need to mediate disputes between tenants and landlords to make sure that people can stay in their houses and their homes. Housing is a human right, and I will fight to protect that as Attorney General.
It absolutely is a human right. If you don't have proper or a safe house, how could you function in society without a roof over your head? So my next question is about labor and employment, also just as important as housing. What role do you foresee the Attorney General playing in advocating for workers generally? So in the gig economy, and especially now in a semi-post-COVID world. I don't want to say post yet. Yeah. We're not necessarily out of the darkness, but I do see the sun somewhere down the end of the tunnel.
Yes. Well, thank you for that question. I have spent my career fighting for working people. I am very proud in this race to have the endorsement of the Massachusetts Afl-Cio and more than 50 individual labor unions across Massachusetts who collectively represent more than 500,000 working people across the state. I have taken on some of the biggest corporations in America that have been stealing wages from workers and who have misclassified workers as independent contractors. Companies like Starbucks and FedEx and Uber and Amazon and IBM and my alma mater, Harvard University, which I proudly sued at least 4 times. And I will bring that passion and that devotion to enforcing our very protective laws here in Massachusetts to the AG's office. One thing I know also is that it can take a long time for these wage discrimination cases or these wage theft cases to get through the process. And when you've had your wages stolen by your employer, you can't afford to wait the weeks or the months or even years for these investigations to take place. People need to put food on the table tonight. You got to pay your rent tomorrow. So I plan to set up a fund so that people who have had their wages stolen can get paid now while the AG's office goes after those bad actor employers who've been stealing money. It's the same way our unemployment system works, our workers' comp system works. Why not wage theft? And an independent contractor misclassification is a huge issue. I've taken on many industries to combat this growing crisis, and most notably in recent years, the gig economy. I'm very proud of being the leading lawyer across the country that's been taking on the gig economy for misclassifying workers and tearing apart the social fabric of our employment laws and protections. I'm a proud co-founder of the coalition that successfully blocked big tech from putting a ballot initiative on our ballot this November, which would have carved out these companies from our labor and employment laws. And you asked about what the post-COVID world is going to look like. We don't know when we're going to be there, but I will say that this COVID pandemic has really laid bare the plight of working people, and especially frontline workers, I think have gotten a lot more public attention in these last few years about how critical they are to all of us. And I think it's an important moment for working people now when we can really strengthen their protections, their rights. There's a lot of leverage that workers have right now, and I will fight to make sure that workers' rights are protected, that they have the right to join and form unions and get fair contracts, and their right to organize is strongly protected.
Not the Starbucks, Shannon, not the Starbucks.
Yes, the Starbucks.
And
teasing. Dunkin' Donuts too, for that matter.
Oh, don't say that to New England.
I don't discriminate.
Don't say that to New England. All right. So my last question, this one is more so about cities like Lawrence and Lowell. I'm from Lowell. I was raised entirely in the 978 area code. And so I know how important these kinds of elections are. But oftentimes in these big elections, smaller but yet mighty and colorful cities like Lawrence can often be somewhat forgotten. So how would your approach as an attorney general benefit a city like Lawrence?
Well, people of Lawrence can really use a win right now. I am proud to have visited Lawrence multiple times. I think this is my 4th visit to Lawrence during this campaign. I've talked with folks here. I proudly marched in the Semana Hispana parade a couple of months back. I visited the Lawrence Community Works, wonderful organization, is doing some really fabulous work with young people in particular. I've met with current and former city councilors, and I know that things are hard for people everywhere. Especially here, people don't have the money to pay for their basic living expenses. The cost of everything is going up. The cost of housing is skyrocketing, and people need some wins. And my core experience in fighting employers to make sure they're paying workers their proper wages is essential to one thing that we can do, because how better to make sure people have the money in their pockets they need to pay their expenses than to make sure that their employers have paid them every penny that they owe them. Fighting housing discrimination, making sure that there are resources for tenants. Like I spoke about, I want to set up this office of the tenant advocate. I have proudly represented workers of all types, immigrant workers in particular, many of whom have come from Lawrence and Lowell and other areas of the Merrimack Valley. I have stood up and fought for and won for janitors, construction workers, gig workers, other immigrant workers, and employers think they can take advantage of immigrant workers because they think that they're not going to complain and that they're not going to fight back, and that's a problem. Our laws need to be strictly enforced for everyone, create a fair playing field, and shift the balance of power. Right now, employers have too much power, and employees really need strong representation, and that's a really critical part of the AG's office. I look forward to continuing on with the work I have been doing, taking on industries that exploit working people, and I look forward to doing that as Attorney General.
Thank you. I believe those are all the questions I have for today, and I feel like Oprah up here. So I think we have some questions from the audience.
We do, and we're going to start with our fantastic moderator, and then we'll come to the audience.
Yes, I'm going to have a question related to gun control. And how will your actions in the Attorney General office impact existing restriction gun laws in Massachusetts in light of what happened at the Supreme Court?
I've got 3 children, 2 teenagers and 1 early 20s, and my heart just sinks every time we hear about another incident with a mass shooting. It's just outrageous. Here in Massachusetts, we are very privileged to have some very strong laws on the books that protect us from gun violence. But the Supreme Court has been tearing apart our rights, including the right to be safe from gun violence. And I've spent my career, it's no joke that I've spent the last 20 years figuring out ways around bad Supreme Court decisions. And that's what we have to do. The legal battles that we're going to be seeing in this area, as well as so many others, are uncharted territory. And we need an experienced, seasoned lawyer leading the AG's office who knows how to take on these battles. So in Massachusetts, our legislature has already gotten busy getting to work to try to amend our very protective gun laws here to make sure that they will stand up under scrutiny with this recent Supreme Court decision. And I plan to partner with the legislature to figure out the path forward and make sure that our gun laws are protected here in Massachusetts under the Supreme Court decision. I think what states can do and what we can do here in Massachusetts is just be more specific about guidelines that police departments can follow in determining who is eligible to get a gun license. So we also need to crack down on ghost guns, which is a horrible problem, and I will go after those companies that are selling the parts for ghost guns. I will strictly enforce our laws here to keep our communities and our families safe from gun violence.
Thank you so much.
So I come from Lowell. There's a huge fentanyl problem. What would you, as Attorney General, do to help solve that drug epidemic?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear the question. Can you just say that again?
Yeah. So what will you do to help solve that drug epidemic? Like
the drug epidemic. Yeah. So yeah, thank you for that. I mean, the opioid crisis, it's everywhere, and I know it's particularly severe here in the Merrimack Valley. Our current Attorney General, Maura Healey, has done some really important work taking on some of these corporations that have been profiting off of this crisis, and I look forward to continuing that important work that she has been doing, going after these corporations that have been unleashing opioids into our communities. They've been upending families. One of the major defendants in that litigation has now come forward with a settlement. I think there's a recent one that was just announced as well, but there's a lot of work to be done there still. This is the kind of litigation that I've been doing through my career, big impact litigation against major corporations who are taking advantage of us. So I will continue that. I will fight to make sure that those resources become available for the families who need it, for the people who are suffering from the opioid crisis. I am a supporter of safe consumption sites, which is, I think, an important part of the puzzle. I've been very supportive of the efforts that have been undergone in Somerville to get those started. And we need to have those in more parts of the state because they save lives. I also think there are other players who need to be held accountable besides for just the big corporations in the pharmaceutical industry, but there are sober home corporations that are profiting off of people's despair and claiming that they're offering sober environments for people to recover from addiction, but they're really just preying on vulnerable people. I'll go after those parties also and make sure that they're not taking advantage of vulnerable people who need help and who need resources.
Thank you so much. Other questions from the audience?
So just from my observation from you speaking today, I can tell that you're very passionate about litigation. How do you think, or how will you handle the diplomatic aspects of being Attorney General of the state and establishing partnerships with community groups and with other leaders? Because in some cases, litigation may be an effective method, but do you have any diplomacy or any mediation things that would also be necessary as Attorney General of the state?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, those are parts of what a lawyer does. That's what I've been doing through my career. So I've taken on these big battles in the courtroom and have won. And then after you get your success, you got to bring people around the table and hash out what the resolution looks like. And that is what I've been doing for 23 years, bringing stakeholders together and figuring out the solution. In the process of bringing these big lawsuits and then after the big lawsuits are over. Really important part of the AG's office, what I plan to do is to expand outreach to make sure that all stakeholders are at the table. So I plan to work with community organizations, with worker centers, with unions, with other concerned groups to find out what are the issues that are affecting people, how can we use the power of the office to help. There's litigation, but then there's also the bully pulpit that I would have of the AG's office to put forward and promote, advocate for important policies, working with the legislature to make sure we're getting the right laws passed and enacted, because I know from the ground level as a courtroom lawyer what these laws mean, how the language of our statutes make a difference. So I look forward to working with our partners in the legislature to make sure that the laws that are being passed are helping workers, or helping tenants, or helping consumers, or helping everyone who needs a helping hand here in Massachusetts. I've been really proud to be working essentially as a private attorney general for more than 20 years. And I think all of the skills and experience that I've built up over those years are going to serve the Commonwealth well when I am the people's lawyer. Leading the people's law firm is a really important responsibility. We need a seasoned, experienced lawyer who knows how to take on that responsibility. I am the only candidate in this race who's an actual practicing lawyer. I'm the only candidate in this race who has ever run a law firm. In some states, a number of states have a requirement about how many years you need to have practiced law in order to be attorney general. Connecticut requires 10 years. If that was the law here in Massachusetts, I'd be the only one in this race. I'm really looking forward to serving the people of Massachusetts, using the skills, the experience, and the passion that I have for justice that I have put to work through my law practice. And I would be honored and privileged to have your support. I would thank you so much, all of you. If you're interested in getting involved, Please take a look at our website, shannon4ag.com. We're in the final weeks of this primary race. I'm really excited about how much support we're getting in these final weeks, and I would love to have you all join on board. We got a lot of people to reach out to. We got a lot of people to talk to. Really excited for these last few weeks leading up to September 6th.
Thank you so much.
So, thank you everybody for being here. This is the end of this piece of the presentation, and now I'm going to bring Darian to come to the podium.
Good evening. My name is Darian Johnson, and I'm the policy lead for the Black Economic Council in Massachusetts. Before I make my final remarks, can we give a shout out to Northern Essex Community College for allowing us to be here? When I called Noemi, and this was about 2.5 months ago, and I told her why we should do this, the community of Lawrence and the Merrimack Valley, from the Columbia gas to the pandemic, truly shows the resiliency and the strength of the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. And conversations like these are so important, to have the moments you can hear a candidate and really talk about the issues and say, this is why I'm here. This is why I want to represent you. And it's so important. You know, we can't do the work that we do as the Black Economic Council of Massachusetts without a partnership like this. And I also want to give a shout out to our partners here who are E4All, the Davis system, and the Lawrence Partnership for also being able to collaborate with us and to bring this type of conversation for you. So can we give them a round of applause before we... So in closing, I just want to say thank you all for coming out today, and for those live stream as well. Really appreciate you tuning in and really becoming civically engaged to a race that's so important, and it's really going to define who is going to be leading us. This is the public lawyer, and this is such an important office. So I just want to say once again, thank you so much for being here today, and really and go vote. So thank you.
There is food on the other side. Please enjoy.
you.